Every astronaut floating in zero gravity, every child learning to tie their shoes, every soldier securing life-saving equipment in the field, every person with arthritis who can still dress themselves. All of them depend on an invention that came from a man getting annoyed with burrs stuck to his dog. And the journey from that moment of irritation to literally holding together the International Space Station is one of the most unexpected stories in the history of human innovation. This is the story of Velcro, the invention that changed everything. Picture the world in 1941. For 5,000 years, humans had been fastening things the same way. Buttons carved from bone or shell, laces threaded through eyelets, and recently, zippers. Those mechanical marvels patented in 1893. But here is what nobody talks about. None of these solutions were actually good. Buttons required precise threading through tiny holes. Try doing that with cold fingers or while under stress. Zippers jammed, broke, and required perfect alignment. And laces? Well, if you have ever tried to tie wet bootlaces in the dark, you know the problem. During World War II, soldiers were dying because their equipment came loose. Boots took precious seconds to lace under fire. Gear required fine motor skills to operate when your hands were shaking from cold or fear. The military was desperately seeking better fastening solutions. But the textile industry had no answers. Fashion houses were comfortable with buttons and zippers. They had been using the same technology for decades. Innovation had stalled. The fastening world was trapped in the past. And then a Swiss electrical engineer went hunting with his dog. What nobody knew at the time was that this hunting trip would solve a problem that had plagued humanity for millennia. The solution was not going to come from the fashion industry or the military contractors. It was going to come from nature itself, and from a man curious enough to look at an annoyance and see opportunity. Georges de Mestral was 34 years old when he returned from hunting in the Swiss Alps that autumn day in 1941. His dog came back covered in burdock burrs. His wool trousers were peppered with the same sticky seed pods. Most people would have cursed, picked them off, and forgotten about it. De Mestral was not most people. He was an electrical engineer. His mind worked differently. Instead of just removing the burrs, he took them to his workshop. He put them under a microscope. And what he saw changed everything. Each tiny burr was covered in hundreds of microscopic hooks. Perfect little curved barbs that caught on anything with loops. The wool of his trousers. The fur of his dog. Nature had designed the ultimate fastener. Now that is a story worth telling. Here was a system that required no precision, no alignment, no fine motor skills. Just press together and it held. Pull apart and it released. Simple, brilliant, obvious. But turning that observation into a product? That took 7 years of failure. De Mestral tried cotton first, too weak. He experimented with different weaving techniques. They did not hold. He tested various synthetic materials. Nothing worked the way nature did. The breakthrough came in 1948. Nylon, sewn under infrared light. The heat made the nylon fibers form perfect tiny hooks, strong enough to grip, flexible enough not to break. That moment in his workshop, looking at artificial hooks that finally mimicked nature perfectly, that was the birth of biomimicry and materials science. De Mestral combined 2 French words to name his invention. Velours, meaning velvet. Crochet, meaning hook. Velcro. On May 13, 1955, he received his patent. 14 years from burrs on his dog to a protected invention. But getting a patent was easy compared to what came next. He had to convince the world that his ugly, loud, industrial-looking fastener was the future. Every major fashion house said no. Every textile manufacturer turned him down. Too ugly, they said. Too loud. Too industrial. The ripping sound was unacceptable for clothing. They saw no market for such a crude fastening method. De Mestral founded Velcro Industries, but he was running out of money and patience. The fashion industry's rejection nearly killed Velcro commercially. For over a decade, his invention gathered dust. Think about that for a second. One of the most useful inventions in human history was sitting on a shelf because it did not look pretty enough. Then came 1969. NASA was preparing for the Apollo missions. They needed fasteners that would work in zero gravity, in extreme temperatures, in the vacuum of space. Traditional fasteners were useless up there. Buttons floated away. Zippers froze solid. Laces were impossible to tie without gravity. NASA tested de Mestral's hook and loop system. It worked perfectly. Better than perfectly. Astronauts could secure anything with one hand. Food packets, tools, equipment. They even put a small Velcro patch inside their helmets so they could scratch their noses during spacewalks. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon, Velcro was holding their equipment together. When the command module splashed down in the Pacific, Velcro had kept critical instruments secure through launch, flight, and re-entry. The fashion industry had dismissed it as too crude, but NASA trusted it with human lives. That endorsement changed everything. If Velcro was good enough for space, it was good enough for Earth. What invention should I cover next? The space program had given de Mestral something no amount of marketing could buy: credibility. And from that credibility came the first domino in a chain reaction that would touch every industry on the planet. Here is where it gets really interesting. The moment NASA endorsed Velcro, everything changed, but not in the ways anyone expected. The first breakthrough came in children's shoes. Parents were exhausted from teaching kids to tie laces. Shoe companies saw an opportunity. By 1980, over 60% of children's athletic shoes used hook and loop fasteners. Kids could put on their own shoes. Parents saved time. Children gained independence. A simple change that affected millions of families daily. But that was just the beginning. Hospitals discovered that Velcro solved problems they had not even realized they had. Patient restraints that were secure but not threatening. Prosthetic attachments that people could manage themselves. Adaptive clothing for elderly patients with arthritis. The American Association of Retired Persons endorsed Velcro products. For people with limited dexterity, it meant dignity, independence, the ability to dress themselves without help. Then the military took notice again. In 1981, the U.S. Army adopted Velcro for uniform patches, pocket closures, and equipment mounting. When soldiers trusted their lives to it, civilian objections about aesthetics seemed silly. Outdoor recreation companies followed. North Face, Patagonia, and others put Velcro on everything: jackets, backpacks, sleeping bags, tents. By 1990, global Velcro sales reached $1.2 billion annually. Over 300 different industries were using hook and loop fasteners. But the real chain reaction was just getting started. When you have been around long enough, you start to see how everything connects. De Mestral's observation of burr hooks had created an entire ecosystem of innovation. Medical device makers developed specialized Velcro for surgical applications. Aerospace engineers created silent military versions that would not give away positions. Automotive manufacturers used it for interior panels and cable management. And then came the International Space Station. Launched in 1998, it uses over 10,000 Velcro strips to secure everything from food trays to scientific instruments. Astronauts joke that Velcro is the most important technology in space after life support systems. Think about that. A Swiss engineer annoyed by burrs on his dog created technology that is literally holding together humanity's greatest engineering achievement. Today, Velcro appears in over 22,000 different products worldwide. Blood pressure cuffs, aircraft interiors, prosthetic limbs, automotive dashboards, even molecular gastronomy experiments use edible Velcro made from food-grade materials. But here is what fascinates me most about this story. That is the thing about great inventions. They solve one problem and create an entirely new world. De Mestral thought he was just making a better fastener. He had no idea he was creating a platform for accessibility, independence, and human dignity. He could not have predicted that his invention would enable space exploration, help children gain confidence, or allow elderly people to maintain their independence. And here is the pattern I keep seeing. The most transformative inventions come from the most unexpected places. Not from corporate research labs or government contracts, but from someone curious enough to look at an everyday annoyance and see possibility. Of course, Velcro now faces new challenges. Those nylon hooks and loops create microplastic pollution. Companies are developing biodegradable alternatives using mushroom-based materials and recycled ocean plastic. The invention that solved yesterday's problems is creating tomorrow's challenges. And that is how innovation works. Each solution creates new problems that demand new solutions. Mestral died in 1990, 35 years after his patent. He lived to see his observation of burr hooks touch virtually every aspect of human life. From the depths of the ocean to the International Space Station. From children's first steps toward independence to elderly people maintaining their dignity. And nobody had any idea what they had just started. If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe and join me every week as we uncover more of the stories behind the inventions that changed everything. And remember, this video is for educational purposes only. Always do your own research.